These are the legends whispered in the night, stories of mystery, fear, and wonder. Welcome to Island Myths and Legends. The islands remember, do you?
The Gayelle lay deep within the forest, hidden beneath the twisted canopy of silk cotton trees. Zane felt the weight of history in the air, the scent of sweat and blood soaked into the earth. This was no ordinary Gayelle. This was the one whispered about in hushed tones, where warriors came to prove themselves, and where some never left. Drums pounded in the distance, steady as a heartbeat. The gathered men, their faces shadowed by torchlight, formed a circle, their eyes filled with expectation. Zane's fingers tightened around his bois, smooth and firm in his grip. Tonight, he would make a name for himself. His opponent stepped forward, a tall, silent figure wrapped in a black scarf, a mask covering his face. He held a bois unlike any Zane had ever seen, long carved from dark, blood-red wood, as if it had been soaked in something ancient and unclean. The drumming stopped. Then the fight began. Zane moved fast, striking first. The masked fighter barely flinched, his movements smooth, unnatural. They clashed, wood cracking against wood, sparks of sweat flying into the air. Then Zane saw his opening. With a sharp cry, he swung his bois and struck the fighter's shoulder. The impact was solid, sure, but no blood spilled, only dust. A dry, gray cloud burst from the wound. The masked fighter didn't even react. Instead, he raised his own bois, moving faster now, the air around him growing colder. Zane struck again, this time at the fighter's ribs. More dust. No pain, no sound. Fear coiled in Zane's chest. He had heard the stories. Not all who fought here were alive. Then the masked fighter stopped. The crowd was silent. The figure tilted its head as if listening to something deep in the woods. Then, without a word, it stepped back, dropping its bois at Zane's feet, and disappeared into the trees. Zane stood, victorious but shaken, staring at the stick left behind. Zane should have left the bois there. He knew that, but something about it, its weight, its shape, the way the deep red wood gleamed under the moonlight, called to him. So he took it home. That night, as he lay in bed, he traced his fingers over the strange carvings etched into the wood. Symbols, patterns. At first, they seemed simple, just old markings worn by time. But when he blinked, they seemed different. Had they moved? Then the drumming started. Soft at first, like a whisper in the distance. Then louder. Zane sat up. The Gayelle was empty now. Wasn't it? The fight was over. The men had gone home. And yet, through his open window, he swore he could hear the sharp crack of bois clashing in the night. Then movement. The moon cast his shadow long against the wall. But something was wrong. His shadow wasn't still. It was fighting. Zane's breath caught in his throat as his own silhouette swung, ducked, struck against an invisible opponent. His arm twitched. A sharp pain lanced through his shoulder, like he had just taken a blow. The drumming grew louder. By the third day, Zane knew something was wrong. He tried to leave the bois outside, but it always found its way back. He locked it in a chest, only to wake up with it in his hands. His arms were bruised, his muscles aching, as if he had spent hours in battle. But he had no memory of fighting. And then came the whispers. He heard them in the wind, in the rustling leaves outside his window. Voices speaking in a language he did not understand, urging him back to the Gayelle. He sought out an elder, Old Man Baptiste, a former bois champion, a man who knew the old ways. When Baptiste saw the bois, his face darkened. "You should have never taken this," the old man murmured, tracing the carvings with a wary hand. "Why? What is it?" Zane asked, his voice tight. Baptiste exhaled sharply. That bois belonged to a fighter who was never defeated. And because he never lost, he never left. Zane's blood ran cold. A fighter who refuses to lose becomes part of the forest, Baptiste continued. Bound to the Gayelle. The stick keeps them fighting. And now it has chosen you. Zane's grip tightened around the cursed bois. He felt the hunger in it. It wanted combat. It wanted blood. Zane tried to rid himself of the bois. He buried it, burned it, threw it into the river. But every night it was there waiting. And then the ghosts came. They stepped from the shadows of his room, their bodies wrapped in tattered cloth, their eyes hollow. "The Gayelle is calling," they whispered. Zane fought. He had no choice. His body moved on its own, his hands striking against enemies he couldn't see. His bruises deepened, his breath came short. Every night the battle continued, and he knew if he lost he would take their place. Carnival Monday night. Zane stood in the Gayelle once more, the moon high above. The drumming was deafening now. The spirits gathered around him. His final opponent stepped forward, the original owner of the bois. The figure was taller than before, its mask now cracked, its hands nothing but bones wrapped in dried flesh. The air grew heavy with the weight of centuries of combat. Zane knew what he had to do. The ghost raised its bois. Zane lifted his own. The fight began, but Zane didn't swing. He dodged, blocked, stepped back, refusing to strike the final blow. The bois trembled in his hands, eager for blood. Then he snapped it in two. The spirits shrieked. The ground beneath the Gayelle trembled. And then silence. The Gayelle collapsed into dust, the forest going still for the first time in centuries. Zane woke up, his body scarred with the carvings of the old bois, burned into his skin like a final warning. He swore he would never fight again. But deep in the forest, the wind shifted. A young boy wandered beneath the trees. His fingers brushed against something half-buried in the earth. A stick, unbroken, waiting, and the cycle began again.